All right, so let's get started. Can you hear me at the back?
Oh, yes, fine.
Okay, all right, awesome. So the topic that we are going to discuss today is knob and tube and aluminum wiring. So we will discuss them individually. First, the knob and tube, and then the aluminum. And I will try not to go into technical details because I don't want you to get bored. But we will look at these issues from the consumer's perspective and from the real estate perspective. So that's more important. Let's start with a little bit about Pillar to Post. Most of you already know about me and about Pillar to Post. So just quickly, we are in business for over 20 years. We have inspected over $40 billion worth of real estate in 2017. And this number just came yesterday. So, we have also completed over 2.5 million home inspections, and that's system-wide, with over 500 franchisees. One of the key features with Pillar to Post is that there is no waiting time. You get the inspection report right there and then. And that's me. I'm the franchise owner for Pillar to Post. And the goals and outcomes, so it also mentioned on one of these sheets that you have in front of you. So these are the things that we are going to cover today. We are going to talk about different type of electric wiring. We are going to dig a little bit into the history of wiring, different types, which one of them is safe, which one is, what are the insurance consequences of them, and what are some of the disadvantages of different systems. Obviously, we are going to discuss. I will try to touch base on the cost of upgrade and replacement or maintenance. So typically in a residential setting, we have knob and tube systems. We'll go into the detail about that. We have aluminum wiring system. There's a combination of aluminum and copper. Why that is dangerous, we'll talk about that as well. The copper wiring system is probably the best system that is available out there, and in about 70% of the homes in and around this area have copper wiring system. So that is the new norm. That is what most of the new constructions have. Different amperage are 60, 120. 60 is usually with the knob and tube, and in some copper wiring, I've also seen 60. But mostly in the subdivision homes, it's either 100 or 200. So knob and tube wiring. It's an old system, and that was a standardized method of electrical wiring. If you ever happen to see a century home, you are more than likely to see a knob and tube wiring in there. That may have been upgraded to a copper wiring and a breaker panel, but it doesn't mean that. But there are a lot of things to look for, especially when you go into a century home. So this wiring system is basically made up of two parallel wires, open wires, hot and neutral, and they supply electricity to different areas of the house. Some of the issues with that wiring system is that, number one, they do not have ground cable, so there is no grounding, which obviously is a problem. And then that system does not support modern appliances. So if you have TV, like the new flat screen TVs, or printers, or some of the other modern appliances, this system is this system is not going to support that.
So even if you plug in a printer, it doesn't work?
So anything that has a grounding cable will not work with this system. So if you see the switch or the what do you call, something that you plug into the receptacle, so if it has three prongs, then it's not going to work. If it has two prongs, or if somehow if you could get rid of the grounding cable and plug in two prongs, yes, it would work, but it's risky. All right, so these are some of the examples. You can see actually over here, These are the knobs, and these are the tubes. Knob is basically, it takes the wire along the length of the floor joists, whereas the tubes basically cut through the joist and take the wire to the next segment. And that's how they are all wide, usually in the basement. And if you go into a century home and it has an unfinished basement, you would see something like this. This is knob and tube wiring, a typical example in an industrial setting. So this is basically a farmhouse, and even now, knob and tube wiring is very common in farmhouses, big sheds, because this is very cheap to do. That's why they do it, and it's very easy to maintain as well. Yeah.
So what's the maximum amperage for knob and tube?
60, usually 60.
More than 60.
I haven't seen any 100, so it's usually 60. Okay, so this is another example. So like I was saying that these are the knobs, they connect the wires, and then these are the tubes that goes through the floor joists, and then they go, and that's how they supply electricity to the whole house. This is a hot wire, this is a neutral wire, and this is the connection. So it was a very simple system. It was very easy to maintain, but it was back in those days when there wasn't much requirement of power. It was usually just one receptacle per room. Now, these are some of the problems that can happen with this wiring. So over here, you can see scorching. You can see live wire exposed. The insulation is being eaten by a rodent or whatever. But this has been, the wire is exposed, and if somebody touches it, you know what's going to happen. Okay, so yeah, this is another example. So somebody has tried to use the tape to cover the live wire, which is never a good idea to do, because this can trigger fire right away.
Yeah. But some tapes, they are electrical tapes.
Electrical tape is different. You can use electrical tape,
Okay.
but it's not recommended. Plus, it's only the electrician's job to do to use the electrical tape.
Okay.
But if you use the plastic tape or the duct tape, no, absolutely no.
Okay.
All right, so a little bit about the history of knob and tube. It was used between 1980 and 1930, and it was discontinued in 1950. So that is usually the time frame. If you see a house, if you go into a house which was built in 1930s or 40s or 20s, you would see a knob and tube wiring. You can go into the basement and you can see those knobs and tubes hanging around. Even if the house has been upgraded to a breaker panel and aluminum wiring, still you would see some knobs and tubes because they are embedded into the floor joists, so they are easy to see. But if you see that situation, then obviously you know that the house has been upgraded, and you can get the certificate and all those things. It is only permitted in certain industrial and agricultural settings. It's very difficult. It's very expensive system to maintain. So those ceramic knobs and tubes, they are very expensive, and that's why they were phased out and they are not in use anymore. And obviously the competitive products, they were very readily available, and they were very cheap to maintain and install. Plus, electricians prefer to have something which is safe. So some of the disadvantages of the system, they do not have safety ground, the grounding cable. Can get damaged during the building renovations. So one big thing is the insulation. So it was asphalt saturated flexible insulation that was used to insulate those wires, and that can dry over time, and the live wire can get exposed. Remember the picture that I showed you? The wire was exposed in that. It gets damaged by rodents, so that's another issue. And like I said, the modern appliances like the computers, the TVs, the printers, they're not supported by this system. Yeah, the old homes have their own charms, but they have their limitations as well. Some of the other disadvantages are there are only few branch circuit than needed. So if you go to old homes, you would only see one receptacle per room. Usually you will, but now in the modern homes, you see like 10 receptacles in one room because you need more power. You need power on almost every corner. You have your cell phones to charge, you have your printers, you have computers, you have whatnot. Um, One of the things that is probably the biggest disadvantage is the magnetic field that it creates inside the house. So the live wire, which is going, it is not covered with, if it is not covered properly with the insulation, then it can create a magnetic field, which is not good for our health. Okay. A lot of people talk about these electromagnetic fields, especially if their homes are located where there's a live wires, like heavy duty wires going in the backyard. A lot of people ask me these questions that if those wires have any issues or if there is any health consequences of those magnetic fields. So yeah, I mean this is something that you have in your house. So yeah, it has direct consequences. It is a fire hazard, especially near the foam and blown-in insulation. So that's the issue that we see today. The insulation is usually blown in. And if you have knob and tube wiring running through your attic, then that can trigger a fire. It's a fire hazard. Now, these are some more examples of knob and tube wiring. Now this is discontinued. So you can see that the knobs are there, but there is no wire because they have upgraded the system. So these are the new wire, new junction boxes. So these old knobs are just left there. I don't know why, but they are just left into the house. But you could see that that it has been upgraded. Now this is an example of an old knob and tube junction box that is very near to being burnt out, and there's a lot of tape and there's a lot of issues in here. This is what I was talking about when you have blown-in insulation in the attic and you have live wires running through it. This is a disaster waiting to happen.
Is it asbestos?
No, it's not asbestos. It's a blown-in fiberglass insulation. Loose insulation. All right. Any question? That's good. Let's dig into the cost of replacement. It's usually around $10,000 to $15,000 for 2,000 square feet home. The century homes are usually bigger, so the cost usually run into $20,000 to $30,000, and that is the replacement of the whole system from knob and tube to aluminum wiring. So they basically run new wires. They have to install new panel, and obviously the branch circuit wiring is something that they also have to do because of the new wiring.
So is it included for disposal of the old system or only replacement?
It's just a replacement.
That should be $20,000.
Correct. Correct. Something about the upgrade and maintenance. So sometimes I have seen in some homes that what people do, they basically leave the knob and tube as is, and they add a layer of aluminum wiring on top of it. So some of the bedrooms, for example, will get aluminum wiring, while the basement still have knob and tube. So that's like an overlap of different systems. Now that is very dangerous to do because these systems usually do not sync. So that is, if people think that they have a partial upgrade to a new system, but that's really not the case. It's the bottleneck is still the knob and tube system that you have in the house. So if you are replacing, you have to replace the whole system. You should not do it in patches. And as a realtor, if you go into a house and you see fires that are going through the floor joists, and you see new panel and you see a new wires as well, well, the first thing that should come to your mind is it a two system overlap? Because that is usually dangerous. But if it has been removed properly and the new system has been put in place and the old wires have been taken off, then yes, that's an acceptable system. Yes.
Would someone ever replace the old system and leave the wiring there? Like not connect it, but actually just leave the wire?
Yes. So back to his point, that's the disposal of the old wires is usually costly. So that's why they will just leave it here.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yes, I have seen that too. So if I go into a home that has those wires, I make sure that it has those wires with my tools that
Well,
I
I can
have.
see they were cut, like they weren't connected to anything, just.
Still,
Each one
there is a
was-
possibility that one
Yeah.
of them is left connected.
Yeah.
So, so a better option is to get it inspected thoroughly, either by an inspector or through a electrician, to make sure that there is no issues in there. Right, insurance is usually very costly, and some companies do not insure at all, which makes sense. So yeah, summary about knob and tube wiring. It's an absolute system. It's very costly to maintain, expensive to replace. Overloading can cause system to fail, and obviously can cause fire as well. And obviously this is also support the modern lifestyle. How many of you have ever come across knob and tube? You said you have. Yeah.
Downtown, there's like.
Downtown,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Anyone that's worked downtown,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
one thing you have to be careful.
Well, I have found quite a few of them actually up north as well. So the old homes, like the century homes, we have almost all of them have knob and tube wirings. Okay. So we are on time. Let's dig into the aluminum wiring. Okay, so this is also an old system, but it's still in use. You can still find aluminum wiring in many homes. So basically, the system consists of aluminum wires and aluminum conductors. They are made up of 3 wires. So there's a hot, there is neutral, and then there is a ground cable. So it is obviously a better system. And the aluminum wires basically supplies the electricity throughout the house. Now, like I said, this system is better than knob and tube because it has a grounding cable, and it does support the modern appliances. However, this system also has a lot of limitations. Excuse me. But let's dig into the history a little bit, because we need to understand why this was put in place at the first place. So back in 1960s and 70s, this is a system that was used in that time. And the reason for aluminum wiring was because copper was expensive. Now, can you think of a reason why copper was expensive in 1960s and 70s?
Or because they can make gold with copper.
No, because you guys were bombing.
Pardon?
Because they were bombing.
Oh, yeah.
All the copper
yeah.
was used for military.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was the time when they started using the aluminum. From back in days, like from early 1900s, all the electricians agree. Well, it's a proven fact that copper is a much better conductor of electricity than aluminum. But they had to replace it with something because copper was very expensive. So aluminum came out as a very nice alternative. And there were a few issues. For example, they had to use a bigger gauge wires. So instead of using a 14 gauge wire, they had to use 12 or 10. Oh, by the way, 12 and 10 is a bigger gauge than 14. It's the other way around in gauges. And so they were trying to get the same effectiveness out of a higher gauge wire. It is still in use, but it's permitted with the appropriate installation and methods and materials. So this is very important. And this is what we are going to talk about today. What are the installation methods that we have to follow, and what are the materials that have to be used in the aluminum wiring, because there are consequences. If they are not done properly, then obviously there are a lot of consequences, insurance, cost, few other things that we're going to discuss. A couple of other points. Aluminum over time became expensive, so we don't use that anymore. Well, sometimes we do, especially in the commercial settings, because if you have to transport electricity from point A to point B, and point A and point B are far from each other, like the electrical head, like the electrical hubs. So aluminum is an alternative which has already been installed. So instead of upgrading everything to copper, they just continue to use those aluminum wires that are stretched from one powerhouse to the other. So some of the disadvantages, like I said, we have to use a thicker wire. So it's usually 10 or 12. So I will show you some examples as well. What does that mean? But usually the copper wire, which is used in the branch circuit wiring, is 14 gauge. Over here, we have to use either 12 or 10. Flickering lights, warm cover plates on switches, and receptacles. Now, these are the issues that start coming up in early 70s. When systems were overloaded, the consumer needed more power, and they started putting in, so for example, this receptacle that we have over here, it has 3 prongs, and it's basically a two, you can plug in 2 things in it. But you may have seen a lot of people plugging in the 6 receptacle one. Which one? Yeah, this is an extension. So you use an extension, you use other things. So these things, if it is aluminum wiring, it would hot up.
Cause of fire.
That can cause fire. Yes.
So what are the flickering lights?
Flickering lights?
Yes.
Light flickering, like
Like on and off.
so,
kind
like
of.
on and off.
Okay.
So
Is that because it was overheating and causing like a break in the circuit? Kind of
yes, yeah, I'm gonna talk about that.
thing? Oh.
So aluminum expands, and that creates a little bit of gap at the connections. So the connection is not perfect, and that's why the electricity is not flowing as fluently as it should be, and the lack of amperage caused the flickering. So that's
So could that technically like spark?
it can cause a spark, yes. And I will show you some examples as well, what can happen. And that's the reason why it is not a good kind of wiring to have. Okay, some of the disadvantages is aluminum oxide, which is rust that develops over time, and that interfere with the flow of electricity. So that is one thing that also results in flickering lights. The two system overlap, which is joining aluminum and copper wires, that can result in much oxidation, and obviously the connection gets poor with time, and it can again cause fire. The electrolyte causes galvanic corrosion that results in unstable connections over time. So if you have an aluminum wire coming to this receptacle, for example, and this receptacle is made up of copper, so these two materials do not match.
Yeah.
I mean, they do, but over time there's a corrosion, and that would result in the lack of amperage. So for example, this is designed for 15 amps, but over time you will not get 15, you will probably get 10 or maybe less, which means that you will not get the power which is required out of it. And eventually, if you overload that receptacle, it will become a hazard and can catch fire. One of the solution that is done is called pigtailing, but some of the people start using copper and aluminum, which is obviously not safe to do if it's not done properly. Now, this is the example that I was talking about. So this is aluminum, which is silver, and this is copper, which is orange or brown. So this is the difference that you could see. If there is any place in the house where the wiring is exposed, you could actually see if it's copper or aluminum. For us as a home inspector, that is why we open the panel, and because that is where the wire is exposed when it is connected with the breakers. So that's where we see if it's a copper or an aluminum. Plus, you would see labeling like this, aluminum wire. Some of the brands that use aluminum wire is Alcan, so that's also an indication. These are some of the other examples. Now, coming back to your point, have a look at this. The burnt out receptacle. Similarly here, this is exactly the same thing.
And that was like, it wasn't later, this was happening a lot.
This was happening a lot, yes. And that is why they stopped using aluminum wires altogether. But it still happens. I have seen this with my own eyes in GTA, so it is there, it is happening. Some of the solutions, before we go to the solutions, are we all clear why this happens? Okay. So, as a solution, some special connectors were introduced. So they include the small receptacle. They are marked with COAL or ALCU. Some of the larger receptacles, the receptacles that are used for your kitchen or for your laundry, for example, or for the furnace, or something that require more power. There were larger receptacles, 20 amp or more, and they were also marked with ALCU. ALCU means aluminum copper, so they can work with both. So they are flexible, so they can work with aluminum, they can work with copper. And they were introduced in late 70s and early 80s. Yes.
So when you say special connectors, you mean joining points of copper and aluminum, or something?
So the joining point, yes. But if you have a aluminum wire running throughout the house, but your appliances that you are using, they have copper wires, right? So so when you plug in the copper wire into a receptacle that has aluminum wire behind it, so there is a discrepancy there. So those connectors basically, what's that?
Is it like a transformer that you plug into the
It's
plug?
not like a transformer. It's more like something which is built in.
Oh.
It's a special receptacle. Yes.
Oh, okay, so like,
It's good to use.
It is like a
instead
special
of buying
one.
that one, you're buying this other
Correct.
one.
Correct. So this is like a typical copper receptacle. The ALCU, that's also like this, but that has a special assembly on the backside of it. So that prevents fire. That's the whole point of doing that. And the reason why we do that is because it's very expensive to replace the whole aluminum wiring in the house. And an easy fix is to buy those small receptacles and small switches to replace the whole one. I know. But we are going to talk about that. Okay. Yeah, so some of the other things are COALR. So this is a revised version. So in late 80s, they figured out that still there are issues with that because the material that they were using were predominantly copper mixed with zinc and some of the other materials. So it was so they scrapped that and they came up with this COALR, which is aluminum alloy. So it is more compatible with aluminum than other materials. Some twist-on wire connectors. So they are also called wire nuts, and they are usually used for pigtailing, the term that we used in the previous slide. So that is a solution that usually electricians recommend if you have an aluminum wiring in the house. But I would not go into the detail of that. It's a very technical thing to discuss. But for a realtor point of view, all you need to look for is any things that are marked with this sign, these signs. So if you see those, it means that there is either a aluminum copper combination or just the aluminum inside the house. Yes. You have a question?
So it's that would be a safer situation.
Correct. Correct.
And you'd be more likely to be able to get insurance.
Correct. Yes. Well, for insurance, there are some more requirements. I'm going to talk that in the next slide. So there are a few more requirements that you have to do that to get the insurance.
Where do you see it on the switch? Like,
Oh, I have examples. I'll show you. Another thing to look for is electrical panel. So if you are going into a house with your client, you happen to go into the basement and have a look at the panel. If it is exposed, then you can see the breakers will be marked with ALCU. So that in that way you know that it's an aluminum copper combination. Yeah. So those are the things that look for as a realtor. So you know.
so what will it say if it's not a combination?
If it is not a combination, if it's just a copper, it's a copper.
Like it won't say.
It won't say
marked.
anything. Yeah, it will not be marked.
Question. Let's say we have a house and this is a combination of aluminum and copper. Is it really bad if you replace it or?
No. It's not that bad, but it is bad. How bad it is, I'm going to talk about that. Some of the other solutions are obviously one of the things is you have to get the ESA certificate. So coming to your point, in order to get the insurance, you have to have the certificate. If you do not have an ESA certificate, the insurance company is more likely to deny your insurance. The Ontario Electric Safety Code, or the code as we call it, it was established in, well, it was long established, but it has been updated over time. And now it requires every house that has aluminum wiring to have the ESA certificate. Otherwise, they will not pass the electric safety code. The house will not pass. If there is a inspection from the city, the house will not pass that inspection unless they do the things that are required by the code and to get the certificate. This is an alloy aluminum series of wire that were introduced in late 80s and early 90s, and it provides better conductivity to weight ratio, and that increases the scope of the wires that are being used here. Yeah, so this is where you will find these labels. I know they will not be exposed, but it is what it is.
Well,
So
I guess if there's any sign of copper aluminum mix.
Correct.
You
could actually see it.
You can take
you can
off
open
of-
it and
yeah.
see it. Yeah. This is the nut, the wire. They are connected here. You could see that this one is connected with these three. It's called pigtailing. It's not a very good thing to do. And if somebody does it, they have to get the certificate, obviously. But this is a quick and dirty fix to aluminum issues.
Sorry.
Yes.
Shall we have access to those slides after finishing this class?
Yeah.
or-
Yeah, sure. They are with Mari. You can actually get them from her.
Mark.
Mari, yeah. You had a question. You had a question. All right, let's dig into the cost. So this one is a little more expensive to replace. It's about $25,000 for a 2,000 square feet home. And well, it's not 300,000, it's actually 30,000 or more for the bigger home. It could be 300,000 if it's like a mansion or something. Sorry, that's a typo. It's a 30,000. And one thing that you could do as with aluminum wiring as opposed to knob and tube wiring is you could upgrade or maintain, plus you can get the ESA certificate and you can get the insurance. So you can live with it. Coming back to your question, you asked me about it, right? So you have to fix the issues, which is you have to install the new connectors and you have to get safety inspection done and have to get the ESA certificate. So if you go into a house where you know that there is aluminum wiring, the first thing you should ask for is a ESA certificate.
But does that have to come from an ESA?
Correct, correct. So ESA, there's a cost associated with this certification. The house will be inspected thoroughly by a ESA electrician, and they would come, they would inspect it, they will take pictures, and they will give a certificate saying that this house has been inspected and it is safe. Now, I have seen those certificates. Sometimes when they go in, they put that sticker on the breaker panel as well. So if you see a breaker panel with a sticker that say ESA certified, it means that it has aluminum wiring, however, it has been certified by ESA. So you have like a level of comfort as opposed to going into a house with aluminum wiring and have nothing in your hand.
What would the lag time be on something like that?
Sorry, what's that?
What would the lag time be? Let's say you go in, there's aluminum wiring in the house,
Right.
you say to the seller, look, if you're gonna sell this property, then we're going to have to provide a certificate.
Right.
How much time would we have to consider before we put the house on the market to get that done?
It varies from area to area. What's that?
I had it done in about 2 days. Well, as long as the electrician can come in. It takes them less than a day to do the whole house. And it was
The process itself takes less than a day, yes.
Yeah.
But I would say to be on the safe side, let's say a week.
Yeah, we did all that, but the guys, it took them less than a day to put all the pigtails on it. It was less than $1,500 with the inspection and everything for the whole house.
Yeah, for the ESA certification, yeah.
Pigtail.
So the person who does the work can do the certification.
They do everything, yeah.
It's an actual electrician, right?
Yes,
Electrician comes
they are
in.
certified
Electrician.
electricians.
Definitely handle everything, they give you the certificate.
And they get that as part of getting their certification that allows them to do that. Because I've seen, ESA inspector vehicles from
Yes.
around. And I just-
Yeah, there are quite a few ESA inspectors out there,
Okay.
and you can contact any of them, and they will come and they will do it for you.
But is any licensed electrician able to do this certificate?
As long as they are a member of ESA.
Yes, okay. So they
What
have
about
to-
your program?
Well, we are not electricians, we are home inspectors. So I don't do this stuff. It's just education purpose. Still, if you do that, it is costly to insure. And some companies do not insure even with the certificate. So yes, there is some issues with some companies. They would not insure, but you will still find some companies who would insure it, and you are, but obviously you have to shop around for that. Yep. Any other questions with that? You said you had an experience with the pigtailing done by the
in
electrician.
the house with aluminum.
So you were able to get the insurance off that?
Oh, it's no problem.
There's no
There's
problem.
no problem. So once they had the certificate, they had no problem.
Right.
Did they ask about the pigtail? Like, is it the insurance company?
Well, the insurance company knows that if it is
The company
being
knows.
ESA certified, then
When the
everything
house-
has
Oh, that
been
means it's been,
inspected.
yeah, that's right. That
They
means
would
it's
know when the
been-
house was built.
Yeah.
They would engage when the house was, most of the time, those years, basically all of them were aluminum. So they would ask.
Yeah, exactly. The late 60s and 70s, that's the time.
They were older, they didn't have it, and they were newer, they don't have it.
Hmm.
It's just that one period. So the insurance company knows. If they look at when the house was built, how old the house is, so they know automatically.
Okay, all right, so.
Basically, the houses, actually here, Richmond Hill, anything almost behind Hillcrest Mall, all those houses are aluminum. And it's like,
Well, I've actually inspected some of the properties and they have been upgraded to copper wiring as well.
yeah, some are upgraded.
Some are
but
upgraded.
They were built, like, Springhead, Kitsilad, all those.
Yeah, so those areas was built in 1970s, early 70s.
Yeah,
Yes,
were,
they have aluminum wiring, yeah, you're absolutely
absolutely
right.
right. But like you say, some people upgraded.
Was that?
So the house built in 1970s,
They don't have to be, but there is a possibility that they were built with aluminum wiring. All right, so next is the summary. Like I said, this is an acceptable system, obviously, because you can get insurance, you can live with it. But it is very costly to maintain. If something happens, you have to call in a certified electrician, and they have to do a lot of stuff to fix that issue. Loose connections and creeping, rusting. Now, these are some of the technical terms that that are associated with aluminum wiring, and all of those things can happen, and they do affect the efficiency, and obviously they can cause fire, and that's the reason why insurance companies are reluctant to do it. ESA certificate is required, and insurance sometimes is expensive. Now, coming back to your point, were you able to get a regular rate for insurance, or was it expensive? You don't know.
I didn't compare.
Okay.
I don't know what it is.
Well, I have done some comparisons, and it's usually on a yearly basis, it's about $500 to $1,000 more. So it's expensive, a little expensive. Okay, any questions? Clear as well? Okay, all right, so that's pretty much about it. You guys have any question generally about home inspections or my company or myself? Yeah.
So basically, how long will it take if we require you for an inspection? Because, sometimes it's emergency to have an inspection.
Right.
How long we need for board hospitals?
I can do an inspection the next day. Well, remember I told you this is a big company. We have more than 32 inspectors just inside the GTA. So if I can't do it, I will have somebody do it for you.
How can we have access to your price range cost?
Shoot me an email or give me a call.
Do you go by like square footage?
Correct, yes. So there's a guideline, obviously, that we have to follow from the company, but there's a variation depending on the area. If you are asking me to go and do an inspection in Huntsville or in Muskoka or somewhere there, obviously you have to charge extra for that.
So what's your boundaries? Like is Brandon?
There is no boundary. I can do inspection anywhere in North America.
No, but I mean like, if I ask you to come, I have a house for sale in Brampton.
Okay,
If I ask you to come there, is there a surcharge because it's
no,
GTA?
no. Inside the GDA, Brampton is a GDA.
Oh, yeah.
Let's say it
I
doesn't
guess, yeah.
So yeah, inside the GTA there's no extra charge. But if I have to go extra, obviously you have to pay for
Oh, yeah.
the time and the
Gas and
commute.
stuff, right?
So, but sometimes some of the realtors that I'm working with, even from this office, and one of them sent me to Hamilton. So I did it for him because they give me like 10 inspections a month. So,
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's pretty much about it.